Hello, in this video I want to have a look at the international peace gardens on the border of America and Canada, North Dakota and Manitoba. But first of all, I want to address like something now. I'm usually, on my videos and also I suppose privately, sort of pretty harsh on fundamental religionists. However, there's a new form of fundamentalism, and they've basically hijacked skepticism and certain terms regarded around that. And for instance, this is like a recent comment that people are very secularists, materialists. They're essentially fundamentalists, and they're very unwilling to accept certain points. Now, for instance, through measure, through repetition, through patterns, in the videos I've been illustrating, not only can you show what's happened in the past, it actually predicts the future. Now, this was in the video regards to Norman Foster, whose proposed architecture and major buildings contain the same system, but first, this is a typical, you've got a brain virus, or that, to paraphrase that, have a confirmation bias, and then it's, well, what's your motive, and you're trying to spoil everything for everyone. Well, this sadly is amongst the so-called skeptical movement. This is overtaking now. They're skeptical of alternatives, but they're not skeptical of the orthodoxy, and that's not skepticism, that is fundamentalism. But so just as another example, I've done more than a few, and I touched on this in the early video quite some time back, but want to have a look at the International Peace Garden, again on the border of America and Canada. So you see that white line, like it literally defines that's the border there, and the peace garden is right in the middle. Now, there are plenty of other peace gardens around the world. In some videos I've been shown, like in Camden here in Australia, there's a peace garden connected to the Baha'i faith. But what do we have a short distance from the peace garden itself? Well, bang, there you go. This is one of the connections. So this is the auditorium, designed as compass and square. As above, so below. From ground level you won't get it, but from above you will. This is an early design for the peace map itself. But even so, International Peace Garden Lodge of Freemasons. Now, I must point out that I'm not, in no way at all am I anti-Masonic, if you think that, but because I think that, well, what Masons are carrying on is a much older tradition. This is not strictly Masonic. Masonics are the Freemasons, and, well, the earlier, before the accepted Masons, there was the original, like, stone Masons, tilers, stone brick Masons, and all these types of groups. And they're into construction, so geometry, proportion, architecture was very important. That was their trade, and so that's why it's so important. But okay, so now we see the map, and just to give an idea of it, and of course the municipal buildings themselves for the on the Canadian side, I do believe, again we see even 420. Now that might be a coincidence, but the compass and square and the G there's no denying that. So this building has very strong Masonic connections, and by that I don't mean in some sort of evil, nefarious way. I mean that, for instance, Masons had to keep their trade secret, especially in the times of the Inquisition and more, like fundamentalist times. And so not just, we used to have strictly religious fundamentalism. Now we also have secular fundamentalism, so that if the architects of this type of people show that what they're engaged in, they're going to receive a strong backlash from the so-called modern skeptic secularists, which again is the new religion. And they behave in a very religious way, because the way they react, it's very condemning. Now, the Peace Tower. Now, these towers were almost sure have been dismantled, but that was in 2016. So they still might be up. I'm not sure of the exact whether they've been wholly dismantled yet, but they were at 120 feet. Now, this will fit the Hermetic Code, which again, recent series I did on New York, 120 feet, so many buildings, but even the numbers themselves, so whether it was a skyscraper, whether it was Grand Central Terminal, whether it was a Manhattan Bridge, we have the same exact pattern carrying through. Now, for instance, at 120, again, so many, 12 people in the jury, 12 steps to the gallows, 12 people on a board. This is a standard which is carried through, but also a repeating theme throughout this whole system is, for one, the Ark of Utnapishtim, or the preserver of life, the original, or at least the oldest surviving flood myth in written form. And the Ark of Utnapishtim describes so many measures, like even the amount of bitumen and oil that was used, and it all comes back to this same method. I've covered it in video, so I won't. I'll try and not to, because again, it's too repetitious. Basically, if you watch any previous video, I'll go into these elements in much more. So at 360 hands, well, the 360-degree compass, the Mayan calendars, even the breakdown of minutes and hours and seconds in the compass brings us this beautiful in geometry, two-dimensional, the golden number, but also 36 in arithmetic. So the quadrivium being one of the most accessible ways to access, to get to this. Now, even so, so the 480 grains in the troy ounce. When you see the gold price, silver price mentioned, they measure it in the troy ounce, not your standard ounce. So when you buy foodstuffs, it's a different type of ounce. Apothecary's ounce for medicine, different again. Also, again, it's an important in religion and tradition, 48 days under the Bodhi tree. And once more, it connects us to the Ark of Utnapishtim as well as New Jerusalem, which is essentially a retelling of this older flood myth. So we have the divine city in New Jerusalem, but we have the original Ark of Life, preserver of life, in the ancient epic of Gilgamesh. 144, now again, because I covered it in the earlier ones, I won't go into detail, repeat everything, because there's just so much connections there, but geometry, the sun, the moon, minutes per day, therefore the earth, ancient and modern systems of measurement, and that it carries through to modern systems of measurement when they should supposedly be, worshipping the metric system, is another proof of this method. Departments of weights and measures are very hermetic, but again, you can't talk about it because the secularists, materialists will really come after you and sort of label you some sort of witch doctor or something like that. Not any different from the religious fundamentalists, which they claim to be opposed against, yet behave in so much basically the same way. If you're not with us, you're against us, and there's the crux of the issue. But anyway, again, the Mayan calendar, the Yugas, you'll see the same thing repeated in 144 New Jerusalem and the Ark of Utnapishtim, but also 144 in the Bible. 12 tribes, 12,000 each. It's an essential in cathedral structure, whether it's Chartres to the modern churches. You need to include 144. Again, earlier videos I went through this, a list of it in older churches and the modern new churches. It is a thing, can't be denied. It's measured, it's repeated over and over. But the quadrivium, music, geometry, arithmetic, and astronomy. So we see a lovely connection there, but also 432, once more, the Ark of Utnapishtim, or preserver of life, New Jerusalem, ancient measure scales, modern measure scales, geometry, the sun, and in the Yugas once more. So we see from east to west throughout time, the same pattern continues on, and it's even being used, as we see, in the modern age. Now, those towers should have been dismantled by now, and the interwoven, this is the name of the piece which should replace the towers at the International Peace Park, which is 178 feet high. In itself, not too much if you look at the modern scales, but the Mohenjo-Daro scale, and this is one of the keys of the issue, that these measures are harmony points between ancient measure systems and modern measure systems, which are joined through the Fibonacci and the phi ratio, the divine proportion, the golden ratio, which people like I.M. Pei, Norman Foster have continued the use of through centuries and millennia. Now, for instance, 1.618181, but it also brings us back to the Fibonacci numbers and the Great Pyramid of Giza. This is one of the recurring themes. It's just all the time in the infinite sea of numbers and randomness, and the supposed confirmation bias, which, for instance, congruent thoughts, used as this very, very poor excuse. Because it's denial. It's a systematic denial of what's there because it does not fit your worldview. So often, again, the materialists will, anyone who's under the general banner of tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, they'll use cognitive dissonance and all these types of things to explain it. Yet they won't address the issue. They'll sort of just drop this excuse, very poor excuse, and then move on because they can't really address the weights and the measures and the repetition of the systems. Now, another key point about the Peace Gardens is the floral clock, which is 18 feet wide. Now, whether it's 18 or 180 or 1800, which is just repeated throughout this method across the world throughout time. But this in itself is another reference to the Fibonacci's, the Golden Ratio, and the Great Pyramid. So, for instance, there we see the proportions of the Great Pyramid once more, and how this connects to the long scale or the Persian foot, or possibly the long foot may go back as far as the Stonehenge Phase 1, but it is certainly used in the Persian foot. So that can't be disputed. Whether it goes back to Stonehenge, okay, maybe that's in question, but the Persian foot, that's what we know. But why this particular number? Because the moon, in proportion to the Earth, is at a fraction either side of 27.3% because of tidal bulging. This incorporates the minimum and the maximum, which is another coincidence of astronomy, arithmetic, geometry. But also, so at 6 yards, we have another, 6 being the most perfect number in regards to many factors, cross dimensions, the Earth, clock and the compass, the vesica. Once again, even 18, once more, will bring us to the fundamental construction in sacred geometry. Now, you can take out the sacred and just call it geometry. It's still one of the core points of Euclidean geometry. And again, each one breaks down and it performs lovely proportions, which can also be used to define musical proportions, such as 3 to 4, 4 to 5, etc. Also definitions of the moon, but also 24 hours per day, digits. It's a lovely number connecting to Tractus once again, perigee for the moon, the size of the Earth, the vesica, like the list, just goes on, and that the ancients transmitted these measurements and these numbers through time is very significant. But again, it's something that's not doesn't want to be considered by the worldview of certain people. 54, again, the pentagon, which itself connects to the Golden Ratio in such a lovely way. 72, because I've covered it again in earlier videos, I won't go in because there's so many connections important built into nature as well as arbitrary measurements. But the fact that arbitrary measurements echo natural cycles so much is again another signal to that this method is being passed on throughout time across cultures. Sun, Earth, Moon and stars, 216, again another lovely number. For instance, 666, or 6 cubed is 216. Cross dimensions, the compass, the moon, the Earth itself, precession, Platonic solids, the vesica, and once more the height of the walls in New Jerusalem, as described in the King James Bible. 288 is one of it's my favourite in this, and what you'll find is that this number is one of the cores of, whether it's, for instance, 288 feet, the Capitol building in Washington, 288 smaller panels above the pyramid in Canberra, Parliament House, perfect number in 4 dimensions, music, Mayan calendars, even the temperature of the Earth, the Pentagon, once more, and 648, sun, moon, and precession, so stars, apothecaries, weight, how it converts to metric, how these imperial systems convert to metric is just wonderful there. And again, it shatters the standard version of history, Platonic solids also as well, and again beautiful in arithmetic in so many other ways. Now, while we're on this, so we might focus 72, 216, 684, 648. Sorry, well, 72 years per degree of precession, basically one human lifetime. 2,160 years per Platonic month. It's also the diameter of a moon in miles, and 6,480, 6,480 years in a Platonic season. Now the whole great year is 25,920. What's the runway? The area 2592 once more. These things always fold back on each other and connect to one another in a random world. Why isn't it not 62 or 3005 feet? They chose this specifically. Now, more to the point, the area of the park itself is 3.65 square miles. 365, that's how many 365 days per year. Now, if you were to get the accurate one, I would not be at all surprised that it's 3.6524 or around that point as well, especially considering all these other points and how these connect across the world and across time. It's the same pattern emerging again and again in the coincidental random world. These things would not happen, that they reoccur over and over again, that you can measure them. That's it's clear. It's not to be disputed. The Peace Garden itself was opened in 1932, which seems a rather auspicious date for so many other important structures. But early on, this lodge building, now it's not a Masonic lodge, it's a lodge building, but it's one of the first structures that were added to it. Now that it's 105 feet long, 60 feet wide, and I could go again on to that, but we'll just be quick now. 105 feet long, or 1680, but again, it's just shifting decimal points at 168 hours per week, and that will convert to 3780, which again, shifted decimal point, that's the radius of the sun in Egyptian royal miles. But Sun, Earth, Moon, now Saturn is one of these reoccurring themes because the way Saturn connects to the Earth in Bode's law. But 378 days is a synodic period. Again, giving or taking away a fraction. These things sort of change depending on the cycles. It's elliptical orbits. Not everything's written in written in stone, so to speak. But that will also convert to the Doric scale at 295.3125. Now the sidereal period corresponds very closely to Saturn in that, but what's more important is, well, we get a tracing board, Doric, Ionic and Corinthian. These are Doric and Ionic ancient measure scales, that these measures always convert to multiple sets of ancient scales. But to begin with, so Sun, Earth and Moon alignment is a synodic month. That's where we get our calendar from. That's every 29.53 days. And if you multiply the diameter of the Earth by 29.53, you'll also get the distance from the Earth to the Moon, essentially hitting the average, getting right on that sweet spot. But more interestingly, that also will convert on the Cremona scale to 1080, so 108. This in itself is another one of... Now, I could break down the measurements of this lodge into much more detail, but I'm trying to be quicker here. And why is that so lovely? Well, Sun, Earth, Moon, and Saturn once more. 108 in the long scale will give us the diameter of the Moon. 108 times the Moon will give us the distance from the Earth to the Moon. 108 times the diameter of the Sun will give us the distance from the Sun to the Earth. 108 or 10,800 nautical miles divides day and night, so that you can only see half the Earth, and that's in nautical miles. That's the circumference. 108,000 kilometers. The polar diameter of Saturn, 108,000 kilometers, the speed of the Earth around the Sun, and 10,080 times the diameter of the Sun is the distance from the Sun to Saturn. Sun, Earth, Moon and stars. This is what's embedded in all this architecture, and it's always so strongly connected to Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Oddfellows, Templars, and all these organizations who clearly in their their symbolism have these patterns going on. Very, by definition, their patterns show, geometry, measurement, all the core tools of these sciences. We know that the ancients, for instance, the Great Pyramid, is, however much I want to deny some elements of it, we know that the people who built the Great Pyramid were masters of astronomy. Now, sadly, there are some people who will either call this satanic, so to speak. But unfortunately, on the other side, we have the so-called modern skeptics, materialists, who exhibit exactly the same pattern, where they just don't want to know, where they have a worldview, and where they'll try to use, very poor excuses to say, well, it's a confirmation bias, but they won't address the issue of how often it appears. It appears that somehow. But unfortunately, congruent thoughts, you have the psychological issue where you refuse to accept this. You use very poor arguments to say that somehow I'm attaching it to some dark theory or mystic and some Freemasonic stuff cooked together. No, it's an observable pattern, it's a measurable pattern, it's testable. Not only does it explain the past, it also explains future structures, future cities. Now, for instance, the new city which is being planned for Cairo, Astana, which is just been built, still basically under construction. Whether it's Norman Foster or these major banking and mining groups, churches, cathedrals, who are still under construction, who have been completed, they all exhibit the same pattern and the same model, and to call it coincidence is the height of sticking your head in the sand. So anyway, just as a response to this, and just another example of this pattern which exists across time and across the world and has clearly been transmitted through one form or another. Coincidence does not explain it. Randomness does not explain it. Standard building materials does not explain it. The only explanation is something outside of the accepted models, whether it's the fundamentalist religionists or the fundamentalist secularists. So anyway, with that, hope you enjoyed. Just another example, and have a good one.